A few months ago, I finished building a used cargo van into a off-grid camper. And I made a YouTube video of the process, which like 17 million people watched, which is absolutely wild. And I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone that left a kind comment or a like. So I thought I'd do a follow-up and answer the most asked question, which is, of course, how much did the build cost? Now I can just tell you a number, but that's going to be completely meaningless without any context. So what I'll do is I'll break everything down into categories, talk a little bit about each, and then maybe you could see where you could save money or perhaps spend even more money. So starting with the van itself, I bought a 2012 Volkswagen Crafter with 220,000 kilometers on the clock, and it's a medium wheelbase high roof model, which means it basically fits in a regular car park and I can stand up inside it without hitting my head. I paid 23,000 New Zealand dollars for it, which is about 13,000 US dollars. And for a mechanically sound but older van, that's a price pretty typical of the market here. Also, obviously, I am based in New Zealand, but for the sake of catering to a global audience, I'll read everything out from now on in US dollars and put currency conversions on screen for you as well. Okay, so getting into the actual build. Firstly was the van's exterior. I wanted to keep things pretty low key, so I only added a single window in the side and roof rails to mount the solar panels to. I also put a max air fan in as well so that I could control the airflow in the van. So altogether that was $740. Moving inside the van now for insulation. Thankfully the climate in New Zealand is pretty mild, so I didn't have to go too extreme, but even still I did insulate the floors, walls, ceilings and every cavity I could find using sheep's wool insulation. It's naturally moisture resistant and breathable with a decent R value, so it's perfect for this kind of application. All up, including some sound deadening mat that I also used, that came to $360. Next up is all the wood I used. For the floors, the walls, the ceilings, and the cabinets, I mostly used pine plywood ranging in thickness from 3/4 inch down to about 1/4 inch. And while I was able to save a bit of cash by using recycled timber for the bench tops, I will say any money that I saved there was definitely overshadowed by the time I had to spend pulling the nails out. So totaled up, the wood cost $630. But that's kind of only half the story, because you're also going to need a whole range of fasteners like screws and nails, and all the hardware like drawer slides, hinges, brackets, latches. And while they're pretty cheap individually, by the time you add them all up, they did end up costing more than I thought at $715. So that's actually more than the wood cost. For the appliances, I chose to go with a portable gas stove as my cooking setup. So I really only have one major appliance, and that's my 12-volt fridge freezer. I do have a kettle for hot water though, so I'll include that as well. So altogether that came to $330. Okay, let's look at the plumbing. I wanted to have a simple setup, so I just have two 25-litre water containers. One is for holding fresh water and the other is for catching the drain from the sink. The fresh water is pumped up to the tap with an electric pump and also out to a spray hose for washing things or people with. And even with this relatively minimal system, by the time you add up all the little fixtures and fittings, the tap and the huge sink, yeah, it ended up costing quite a bit at $650. Now in my van build, I don't have a fully lined wet room bathroom space. I do of course have a portable toilet, but I decided against the extra cost, complexity and maintenance of having a permanent hot water shower system inside the van. Something I couldn't do without though is an off-grid electrical system. I didn't need anything crazy, just something that would keep my camera and laptop charged and run the few appliances. So what I've got is 400 watts of solar panels on the roof, a DC to DC charger for charging off the van's engine, an inverter to run AC appliances, and 100 amp hours of lithium battery to store that power. I do have space for extra batteries, but everything charges up so fast with the solar panels and the DC to DC charger that I just haven't really needed to add more. Because of availability here in New Zealand, I didn't have as much choice in brands as I would have liked, so I went with mostly Victron components, which seem to have a good reputation, but I'd say are probably on the pricier end for the components. And actually the thing I hadn't really accounted for in building this system was just the sheer amount of different size cables, wires and lugs that I ended up using. And I mean, individually those things aren't really that cheap, and then when you add them all up, yeah, it gets expensive real quick. So altogether, my system cost $3,120. But that number doesn't include the lighting, which I've kept separate just because there is no way any normal person would go to this much effort with the lights. I mean, because here's the thing, I knew I was filming it for YouTube, and I feel like you've got to do things a little different sometimes just to keep things interesting. So for all the LED strips and special dimming light switches, I ended up spending another $130. Okay, so the cost of paints and finishes was something I had completely overlooked. But after spending all that time cutting and assembling cabinets and walls and ceiling panels, I didn't want to cheap out on the final paint surface. So I went with quality paint that's moisture and mold resistant, designed to be used in kitchens and bathrooms, which altogether cost me $230. For the flooring, I had seen that a lot of people had had trouble with the durability of the wood look laminate type floors inside vans, so I thought I'd tip the scale in the other direction and go with black industrial rubber. Only it turns out that was a terrible idea. While I'm sure the durability would have been pretty good in the long term, it looked awful and smelt worse. So I scrapped that idea and went with a middle ground of a nice thick commercial vinyl, which I was able to get from a local recycling store. So not including my failed attempt, the flooring cost me $40. Now onto bedding. If you've never bought foam before, let me just tell you, it's probably more expensive than you think, especially good quality foam that's actually dense enough to sleep on. And because my cushions needed to be custom sized, I decided to knuckle down and figure out how to make my own using a borrowed sewing machine. So my mattress cushions cost $230. Tools are a difficult category to put a number on because it's really going to depend on your skill level and what you have access to. Personally, I built up a decent collection over the years, so I already had pretty much everything I needed, though I did end up buying a track saw and some crimping pliers to make my life easier. And so if I include them, that came to about $200. And while it's technically not a van build cost, it's probably smart to include a little something in your budget for some tools. So now we're at our final category, and that's all the consumables. So things like sandpaper, tape, cutting blades, all that good stuff that you end up using but isn't actually in the van itself. And that was $255. Which brings us to a total build cost for the van of, drumroll please, $7,630. And if you include the van in that as well, that's $20,630. But there is one important factor that I haven't included in that, and that is how much of my own time went into this. Over the course of 6 months, I probably spent around 500 hours working on this. So if you multiply that by whatever hourly rate you'd work for, say like 500 times $20 an hour, that's like $10,000 right there. I'm not going to include it because I did it for myself, but obviously something you want to keep in mind. So what do you think about the total cost? Is that more expensive than you thought it was going to be? Is it cheaper than you thought it was going to be? For me, it did end up being more expensive than I thought, both in time and money. I thought it was going to take me about 4 months to do, and I'd budgeted $6,000 for the build, so a little bit over. And I think the two things that caught me out were how expensive the electrical system was and how quickly all the little things add up. Because you can kind of budget out the big ticket items pretty easily, but it's just all the little things that you don't realize you're going to need until you actually get to them. All the little fixtures and fasteners and doodads, yeah, they really added up. Hey, but before I wrap things up, I just thought I'd give a more general van update for those of you who are interested in how it's been holding up. And there has been a couple of things I've changed since the last video. One of them you might have already spotted, and that's the desk area. I rebuilt that into a more simple, usable space as opposed to the clunky, complicated mess that I had before, so that's a lot better now. The second thing you won't be able to spot as easily, but makes a huge difference, is I added springs to my 3D printed drawer latches. Because originally they were just friction fit, so what would happen after several hours of driving is the pins would slowly work themselves loose. And then I'd go around the corner and just hear bang as one of the drawers would slide open. So adding springs to the mechanism now has fixed all of that, and I can go down dirt roads and twisty corners and things and nothing comes loose, so that's all good. But yeah, apart from that, everything else has been sweet. Nothing's broken, leaked, fallen off, touch wood so I don't jinx myself. It's just been a lot of fun. Now, I don't live in the van full time, I just use it to travel around places that I want to visit, and I haven't really been filming a lot because this channel is more about building stuff than it is travel vlogs, and Well, I'd love to do a mix of the two. I don't feel like my production quality is quite there yet. So this will probably be the last video of the van you'll see before I get started on my next project. So I hope seeing the cost breakdown and all the numbers and things has satisfied your curiosity. If you have any questions, let me know below. Of course, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.